Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time it is that you're listening to this podcast. Welcome back to Inside Whitehall with me, Jonathan Gunnis, and
Hey, James Starkey.
well, here we are, James. Well, they say a week is a long time in politics. Our first episode was to talk about what 2026 had in store. I don't think we had three Conservative defections in the second
Mm.
week in the diary.
Don't come to us for predictions, perhaps. We didn't, there was no, we didn't have a crystal ball for that. I mean, I don't think anyone did.
Well, James, I think we can safely say the drama of being, I think, like you and I would have been, either in work calls or on meetings, to suddenly see breaking news: Robert Jenrick has been sacked as
Yeah.
Shadow Lord Chancellor and sacked out of the Conservative Party was, and then suddenly the video of Kemi Badenoch, where she's outlined that she felt Robert Jenrick had been treacherous and was about to defect reform in the most damaging way, whilst Nigel Farage at the same time was in front of the UK political media scene outlining his leader in Scotland, Lord Malcolm Offord. I mean, what was going on in your head when you saw this?
Well, yeah, I was going to say, so the Zahawi defection on Monday was, if we can call it such, a kind of standard defection. It was, hey guys, there's a defection coming. I think we knew in the morning. And it was kind of trailed there was going to be a defection, and Zahawi comes out, and there was a slick video which he'd obviously done days before, and all this kind of stuff. And there's a debate about Nadhim. Actually, I mean, I think the interesting thing about Nadhim is they criticised the Tory government, but Nadhim became an MP in 2010 and left in 2014. I.e., his time as a Conservative MP is very much the time that is often critiqued, I think. But it was kind of a standard day. The Jenrick day, again, views aside on whether it's good or bad for our respective parties, we can get into that. The Jenrick day was one of those. I don't know if anyone can remember. I think it was when Michael Gove decided to run to leadership in 2016. There's a picture of like Sam Coates of Sky fame, who turned around to the camera, and he's kind of like that. And to me, that's like, they are those days in Westminster you do that. That was Thursday. When I'd written for work a kind of explainer for the week, which was about predominantly the Zahawi defection. And I was really pleased with myself. It was 11 o'clock on a Thursday, and I thought, oh, I've done this. That needs to be sent off later. What am I going to do? Oh, get my lunch and have a run. And then I looked at my phone, and I'm sure, like yours, it just exploded.
Oh, absolutely. I was actually on a meeting with clients where the client pointed out, I've just seen Robert Jenrick's been sacked from the Conservative Party, which really threw me. And I said, well, I didn't know what I really to do. And they said, oh, how are you feeling? I was like, well, hopefully he's coming to reform. But at that stage, no one knew because Rob
No,
rightly went underground. Nigel said that Nigel obviously admitted in Scotland that they had been having conversations. And then I thought Nigel did what Nigel does best, handled, I think, a situation that it would have been tricky for many with good humour by saying, "Oh, I'll have to go back and buy him a pint and have a chat." And I thought that was a good way of buying himself a couple of hours. Obviously, then get down from Scotland into London, where obviously then we're told that the 4:30 press conference, which was meant to be about Nigel Farage wanting to take the government to court over local election delays or cancellations, I would
is
call
that
them.
what it was? I actually in the mayhem. So that press conference was supposed to be about these delayed elections.
Yeah, it was supposed to be about the announcing of the government being taken to court or sued essentially over delaying
Mm.
local elections. Obviously, that was the day, if I'm not mistaken, that we knew the full list of councils that had, and 29
Yes,
in
I remember
total.
that bit.
So that was what it was originally scheduled for. Now, I think there's a lot of debate about when the Jenrick defection was meant to happen. Some said it would have been Sunday when Nigel was due to do his leader's interview with Laura Kuenssberg, so have that as the
It
opener.
could have even been weeks away from.
It could have been weeks away,
I
yeah.
think me and you. So, Rob a bit. I know some of his advisors, people that he worked with. And I think at least one or two of those are going to go with him to reform. But I think it's fair to say, even now, neither of us have in-depth inside information in terms of when he was going to go. Right? We don't.
Yeah.
It's a lot. It's a lot. I suspect only like kind of three or four people actually know that, and so we might never fully know if unless one of those decide to talk.
No, exactly. Obviously, the big rumor was it meant to be at the time of when Kemi announced her local leadership? Sorry, the local election campaign, and sort of as she's kicking that campaign off, with that being the case. But look,
Mm.
regardless, at 4:30 p.m. we saw Robert Jenrick having, I think, from the stories being told, had to climb a vast amount of stairs due to the lifts not working up to 21-24 Millbank Tower, where Reform HQ is based, and had Nigel sweating it on stage, it looked like, for a bit, where Nigel was joking as he
Mm.
changed his mind, only to then arrive. And what I thought, now look, we'll obviously get into this, I thought Rob gave a very impressive speech. I think we've seen now a number of Robert Jenrick speeches that are very impressive, but I think his diagnosis of where the Conservatives went wrong was forensic. I thought it was detailed. I thought it was damning. And I thought it outlined a lot of reasons why people like me and others felt that the Conservative Party abandoned them and they joined Reform UK. I suppose, James, you might have a slightly different take on that one.
Well, I do. I mean, I think it should be said that in terms of some of the problems with the country, and I was reading a piece that you sent me from, it's James Orr, who's this, who's an interesting guy, and anyone watching, listening should, if they haven't heard of him and looked at him, should definitely go and look him up. He's the kind of the thinker of reform, if you like. I think he's now fully within reform. He was at a think tank and before, and he's the one who I think famously did he arrange the Vance barbecue that I think Robert Jenrick was also at, and some reform types back last summer. Um, but I think what I do think is the kind of just visceral attack on 14 years of Tory government. Did the Tories get some things wrong? Absolutely, including on immigration. Uh, Also, I think the Tories got some things right, notably on education. I think that during that time, particularly to the latter end, we had COVID and Ukraine to deal with, and it kicked off. In the first 4 or 5 years, were the Tories recovering from helping the country recover from the financial crash, which we forget. Which I think the Tories did a decent job of, actually, and I haven't heard anyone, even on the reform side, say they didn't do a decent job of. I've heard other critiques about that time in government, but not one kind of either recognising or even critiquing how the Tories dealt with the fallout from what was, the worst financial crash in my adult lifetime, and I'm not young, unfortunately. um, and I also have questions about, you know, Rob's gone over allegedly to kind of help reform prepare for government. Part of that's part of the messaging from Farage, which is broadly sensible. I think Nigel's like really honest and saying, we want to do drastic things, so we need to know how it works. So when we pull levers, things happen. Equally, I think as Michael Gove said, Nadim's not really that person. That's not what he did. He's not a technocrat, I think was the way Michael put it. And I think Rob's record in government wasn't really anything amazing. I don't know what he could point to. He worked in government, but to me, that's kind of like, every year a Premier League club signs a Premier League striker and says, well, they've got Premier League experience. I think if you played 50 games and scored 2 goals, yeah, you played 50 games. Doesn't mean you're actually, very good at being a striker. So,
You've been practicing that, haven't you? You've
I'm,
been practicing that, I can tell.
yeah, well, that's just. I'm not comparing. Maybe I'm comparing Rob with Adi Akin. Was Adi Akinbaye the guy that Leicester back in the day bought for loads of money, only scored 2 goals?
I think so, yeah.
Um, I think so. So he's the Adi Akinbaye of reform, maybe.
Look out for
Niche,
that quote, ladies and gentlemen. Look out for that quote coming to a newspaper or Sky News studio to you soon. I'm sure he'll
niche
perfect it.
reference. And I think so. But it is an interesting thing. You know, at the end of last week, I mean, Andrew Rossendale went last night, was
Well, I was
talking on
about to
Monday
say,
morning.
then we get the breaking news. Actually, a lot of us might question, is it framed after? Because I think there's a number of things in that press conference that we'll come back to. But obviously, yes, Andrew
Mm.
Rosendale has then come out on late
That's the
Sunday
least
evening,
surprising one, I
which
think.
was, let's be honest, the least surprising one. But still, in a week, we've seen two sitting Conservative MPs and one ex-Conservative MP join
Mm.
Reform UK. And I suppose the debate we'll have in a minute for you and I will be, what do we think of those individual characters? Which I'll sort of give the defence of Zahawi and Jenrick, not that they need it, but I'll outline why I think it's a good thing for reform. And then, of course, what this means for both parties. So look, Nadhim Zahawi, I think, brings Number one, experience, as we've said already. When it was vaccines minister, he did a lot of work closely with Dominic Cummings, where they really did find ways to speed up delivery within the civil service, suspending normal procurement rules, taking out judicial reviews, which always hampers government legislation. So Nadeem has experience of how to make government operate quickly and work effectively with the private sector. I think the other thing he brings is obviously ministerial experience. And as with Rob and others, why is that important? Well, if you're going to take the system on, you need to know the system. And I think that the style that Nadine will offer is very similar to what we saw Danny Kruger, as we said in our last pod, was that, you could either go in and fire all the civil service, but you're going to basically be then hamstrung for 2 years whilst you recruit, if you can recruit, or you can go in there and say, look, guys, we've got a mandate. This is what we want to do. You can you can work with us if you want to, and we want the brightest and the best to come through. And Nadeem, I think you would know, James, is someone who does sort of motivate. He can motivate. He's a sort of a people
Yeah,
person.
100%. Yeah.
And then I think with
And it,
Rob Jenrick, I think what's interesting is, look, I obviously point to the Town Deal Fund that Rob oversaw that was very important in places like the Red Wall, where I served in getting things like Kisgrove Leisure Centre refurbished and reopened. I think Rob showed a lot of principle by resigning from government over immigration when he wasn't able to convince the then Prime Minister Rishi Sunak to go further and harder, particularly around the ECHR. And obviously, I work closely, as you know, with Rob, with Simon Clarke, with Neil O'Brien, with Danny Kruger and Miriam Cates on finding amendments to that last Rwanda bill that was designed to obviously toughen up as much as possible. So I think Rob, and in the leadership contest after Priti Patel dropped out, I backed Robert Jenrick because I thought he got the diagnosis of where the Conservatives went wrong and kind of the fighting spirit and what we needed to stand for going forwards. And I think that was so. I think they're both are huge assets to reform. But I think there's two things in the press conference that we can't dodge, James. One is I thought, from an intellectual perspective, I thought Nigel Farage handled the criticism of Conservative 2.0 very well when he was asked, why are you taking these people? And he said, we are modelling ourselves a lot on the Five-Star Movement in Italy that did end up in a coalition government. The problem with the Five-Star Movement in Italy is when they did enter coalition government, none of them had ever been in government and it totally fell apart and the Five-Star Movement eventually died off. So to avoid that, we need to have some people who've been in the building. And I think that's intellectually very interesting. I think the other thing was, let's be frank, a huge win for Zia Youssef, who's finally got what he wanted, which is a deadline on, as it's now being said, current Tory MPs, ex-Tory MPs, and Conservative councillors, that the 7th of May is your last chance to join Reform UK. And after that, apparently no more will be taken. So people in my position, or those sitting on those green benches, are being given the last chance saloon to think about. And Nigel Farage says that only people who are going to add something to reform and agree with their values will be allowed to join in, and says that people have been rejected. And I can tell you from first experience, I know of at least 10 councillors that have asked to come across to Reform UK that have had their been
do
rejected
you know
from
of
doing
any
so.
former MPs who've been rejected?
None personally, no. None. I never spoke to anyone about defecting. I
I'm
think
not doubting that they have. I was just curious to know if you know any.
no, no. I just think it's you're so you want to control it as much as possible, right? And I think, especially after what we've seen with Rob, I think anyone who is thinking of doing it will keep their cards very close to their chest. So,
I
what
mean,
do
the
you think,
interesting thing for
James, on
me,
the Zia thing? Or I'd be keen to get your view on that. What do you think about
I
the
think
Zia
Zia's
win?
right. Yeah, I think Zia's right. I think Zia's right to worry about the perception of it just being 2.0. So, what is the pitch for Reform Farage Zia? One, the pitch is to the electorate. These guys are the establishment, Tories and Labour. They're the same. They say they're right and left, but basically they're one in the same. You know, they're two hands in two gloves. What was it? I can't remember. I can't think of a good metaphor, but they're one in the same thing. And we're the upstarts. We're the outsiders. I think if you just basically get yourself surrounded by half of the Tory party from 2010 to 2024, that's quite hard. You know, no offense to you. And yeah, there's a lot of people would have looked at you in Parliament and thought this guy's probably at home in reform. And maybe they look at Rob, well, let's call it, was Rob 2, 3.0, whatever the latest Rob is. The guy's been on a journey, as they say, or as other people say, he's, moved away, thought it's better for his career. But, the current Rob, he's more at home in reform, etc., etc. But I think they're at risk of that. I think that's a risk. I also would say this: when I've spoken to friends of mine who are kind of probably broadly on the right. People I respect, probably people who have been in the Tory party. But we talked about what a new party should look like in general terms. One of the things that comes up a lot, if you're really thinking about it deeply and talking afresh, and I think before maybe I've said this in the past, is I don't know, I've never met Zia Yusuf for the record, so I'm not defending him for any particular reason. But Zia Yusuf is the kind of person you want. So people say, "Oh, he used to be a Tory. Okay, he used to be a Tory member of Tory. He never worked in Westminster, right? He was off doing business." And I think what you want is former teachers, firefighters, military people, business people, but people who haven't been in politics. I think that would be a sign that you have very serious momentum. If you looked and so and we haven't got to the candidates yet. And Zia wants to put a lid on how many former Tory MPs can become reform candidates to be an MP. If you're a serious party, you're going to need something around 350 serious MPs, and you're going to need another 300 or so ones who at least can't be kind of taken apart by the newspapers because the certain parts of the media will definitely go after you. But you're going to need to. So it'd be interesting to see how many of them are, people from different walks of life who've never been involved in politics who want to get involved. But I think that's where I kind of think Zia's got a point on this. I think there's a two-pronged issue with just taking lots of Tories. One, just a perception. Okay, why bother voting for Reform? You're just the Tory party. But two, a more serious thing, which is if you really want to change government, is having a lot of the people who have just done government before, why would that lead to change? Logically, yes, Jenrick will say, well, I know how to do things and I know what not to do. Fine, but you didn't do it before, so how do we don't know you do it now? So I think that kind of doing things differently will come from having different people. So I've got a lot of sympathy with Zia's view just on a practical, we're on different sides, but kind of trying to be objective about it. And I think, look, for the Tory party, for Kemi, I think she came across looking really strong that day. I think that her numbers have gone up a lot recently, and the challenge for the party, I've said this before, is to translate that into straight out voting intention numbers, which haven't moved drastically. Reform have flatlined somewhat, but the Tories haven't moved for a few months either. So Kemi's improved. So can she translate this? I think that would have looked good for her. But equally, a lot of the news last week would have been this kind of momentum to reform. So see how it plays out over a few weeks. The reality is, look, and I don't mean this to be horrible. Zahawi, he's an ex-politician. I don't know what Nadhim wants, what he's going to do. I assume it'll be a peerage. I put money if you get in, he gets a peerage.
Nothing more X like an
But
ex MP, James. Nothing more X than an ex MP, as they say.
yeah, I don't think he's hugely consequential. And also, I will
He
say
could be
this:
very big, James,
looking,
very quickly, sorry. As a former chairman of the Conservative Party, he did bring in significant donations, so maybe that's where he'll play a big role for reform.
maybe a bit. Reform seem to be doing okay. They just got a 9-10 million pound donation. So anyway, always good to have more money. But who knows? I don't think it was consequential. I think it was a mixed bag in Reform membership how they viewed that particular defection. Anyway, I think current MPs are obviously going to be more interesting. Rob and Andrew Rossendale. Rossendale, do you want to lose MPs? No. Was it a great surprise? He'd been, as far as I know, he'd been telling everyone that he met since the last election that he might do, or that he had sympathy for reform. I don't. I think if you cast a ballot in the whole of Parliament, in any member of any party, and said which Tory MPs do you think might defect, he'd be in the top two, if not one. So, okay, fine. Rob is obviously the more interesting one. He's been in cabinet. It was dramatic. And on that one, I kind of think Rob clearly had decided either he's going to lead the Tory party or he's probably going to go reform. And again, I think a lot of people suspected that. I think they knew that, but I think they suspected that. And in that scenario, maybe it's better for everyone if he feels more comfortable in reform to go and be in reform and not be a destabilizing. I don't think he'd been particularly destabilising against us. What I would say as a Tory as well is people that are like looking at it with glee. I was on Sky on I think Thursday, and they read a text out from Tobias Elwood saying this is kind of good. We can move to the centre. That I reject. I personally think Rob's probably got more out of ambition than anything else, but who knows? He's your friend. I'm not just having a pop at him. What I would say is, in terms of what his views are, and I think he has definitely, by any measure, been one of the better campaigners and communicators since the election for the Conservative Party. I don't think, oh, great, he's gone. I definitely don't think that. I think we need to be a party where someone who is like Rob feels they can have a home. And I guess that's a wider challenge for the right because for whatever reason, maybe because people are unhappy with the Tories' record or whatever, there's clearly, if you look at the moment, around half the voting country are saying they're going to vote right, but they're splitting it across two parties. And so I think if you look in Germany at the last election, you weirdly had the insurgent right and the kind of traditional right as the two top party of different electoral system. But we have this interesting situation whereas normally you lurch to one, whereas actually it could be the case at the moment in the polling. I think that Labour are behind the Tories. So at the moment, the top two parties are the parties of the right. But it might be possible that doesn't translate because of electoral maths into a victory. So that would be a real challenge for democracy, actually. And there'll be huge pressure. And I think for that reason, we both know and we'll both have views on it. As we lead up to the next election, there's going to be pressure from donors and influential people about what do you do about this. Because I think for a year or two, you tell me what you think about this. For a year or two, it's okay to fight in the open like we've had this week. But when we're 18 months from an election and the pollsters start saying, well, Reform are on 31 and the Tories are on 20 or whatever, but we're going to get a coalition government led by Keir Starmer. A lot of people will say, we can't have that. How are we going to work this out?
Yeah, look, I think Rob going was a serious nail in the coffin of the Conservative Party. I think he was clearly Kemi in
Wait,
some areas
have you got a
rival.
bit of paper? Are you reading that? These are lines to take.
They're not lines to take, thank you very much, James. They're my actual views, and I think that sadly, the throwing of happiness from your Matthew Parrises and David Gawks only goes to reaffirm why people like me got tired and exhausted of continuously having internal warfare for the future of conservatism. And if the Conservative Party wants to pivot back to the Blair Brown Cameroon hellhole, then they're welcome to it. To be perfectly frank, that's why I felt I had to go to Reform UK because I was no longer going to keep arguing over where I thought conservatism should be because it's quite obvious where conservatism needs to be, and that's not pandering to Matthew Parris's liberal elite world at the end of the day. So I feel that Rob was seriously consequential. However, I do also fully agree with you. It's firmly cemented Kemi Badenoch as leader of the Conservative Party, and I think lead all the way through to the next general election. And I've been there and seen it. Defections have rallying effects, and I suspect it will be a much tighter knit and united Conservative Party, albeit Reform will be really going for Katie Lamb, Nick Timothy, Jack Rankin, because they are seen as the future of the Conservative Party. They're bright young things that have come in 2024 for the first time. And I think that that's who, and you've said it to me before, James, off air, that you've said if you were Kemi, you'd be shoving those people front and centre to make the point that this is the future of the Conservatives. And you would say that Reform is welcome to the old Conservatives like me,
Mm.
who were partly responsible for the blame. So I think that let's see what happens. I think Nick Timothy getting the job probably cements him in there. But Katie Lamb, I think, and Jack Rankin, although Jack Rankin did that letter in the Spectator saying he plans to go nowhere. But let's wait and see with time. But I think what's happened is I think there was already an unofficial battle for the future of the centre right, as in Reform versus Conservative, who's going to live, who's not going, who's going to die. I think the anger from Kemi and from Rob, and the bitterness that's clearly come out in the media through op-eds and interviews. I think that
Mm.
firing gun is the war's now out in public. And I agree with you. Over the next year and 2 years, it's going to be a dogfight for who thinks they have the
It's going to
future
be
of the
hard to
centre
get
right.
out of that because, I think if you're Nigel Farage and Reform, you're doing well, but you need the end of the Tory party to get to a majority. Everyone's going to be showing you numbers and saying, you want 31, 32. To get to 35, 36, 37, which is really going to cement a majority, the Tories have got to be down at 12 at best. And so that generates what you've just said, what Rob says, what Nigel says. Oh, this is the end of the Tory party. Well, that means you can't sit in the Tory party and say, oh, yeah, well, let's be nice about it. You're going to have to go back punchy. So I think we are now in this, as you've alluded to, uh, there'll be a wave of animosity for a couple of years. It's kind of unavoidable. And that'll be interesting because a lot of people attacking former colleagues. Rob doesn't seem to have a problem with it, but Rob would probably do almost anything to further his career, so it's not surprising. But how
James,
others,
very naughty. And very unfair.
I'd have to,
I'll tell you now, I was very skeptical of Robert Jenrick when during his time as immigration minister for a while over
when he
hotels.
transformed from being a One Nationer
Then
into a,
then I worked with him. Then I saw his resignation. Then I saw how hard he was fighting behind the scenes, but leading up to his resignation. Then I worked with him on that Rwanda bill, and I really do believe in the sincerity of his views and what he firmly wants to do for this country. And I was very impressed and continue to be very impressed by him, and think that he's
well,
a huge
in
loss
that
to you
case,
in the Conservative Party.
I have a left-handed screwdriver to sell you after we finish recording.
Well, I'm left-handed, so that'd be perfect. Actually, that would help me at home. So that would be.
Okay, there we go, done deal. Gallus has just bought a left-handed screwdriver. So, but yeah, on a serious note, jokes aside, I think like yeah, that it's going to be not fun because I mean, look, me and you are mates, and I think we hopefully will manage it. But that's a lot of people, a lot of there's a lot of people there's people I like. I like you for all your faults.
Can't believe you
I
admitted
like.
that on air. I'm loving the fact that's now
I
on.
know.
That's now on the
I think
record.
we have to edit this bit out. I've got a lot of time for Danny Kruger. When Zia came in, I thought, oh, that's interesting. This successful business guy. Nigel. Without Nigel, we wouldn't have had an EU referendum. And so, it's not. I don't personally look at a lot of people in the Reform Party and think, oh, they're terrible people. Also, I've lived through this. I was on vote leave. I've had all these. Oh, you must be secretly working for Russia. Oh, by the way, you're far right. I've had all the stuff that you guys are now getting, and so I guess I kind of have a sympathy for that because I'm like, I know it's ridiculous and it's thrown out by people that can't come up with coherent arguments about why they don't like you or want you in power or want people to vote for you. And so I have seen all that before. On the same, and luckily I'm not in kind of total frontline politics, so I don't have to sit in an interview and do that. But I think it will be not nice for quite a lot of people who probably do have friends and basically feel like they don't have that. How different are your views to Kemi's policy? Are they wildly different? And I repeat that for lots of people before. There's a question about would the Tories deliver it, etc., etc. But if you just boil down current Conservative Party policy, is it that much of a problem to many of the Conservatives who have gone to reform? Probably not.
Well, as I've said to you before, I think it comes down to the harsh reality that the Conservative Party is only saying what they're saying because Reform UK exists, and that they will instantly ditch any sense of conservatism that they are scrambling to try and claim to have in order to save themselves, not out of genuine conviction of belief. In my personal opinion, particularly on those backbenches. As I say, there are 4 sitting Conservative MPs who voted against my bill to even just derogate from the ECHR when it was a 10-minute rule bill. That's how, and now I'm meant to believe these people are suddenly pro-leaving the ECHR. I just don't buy it and won't ever buy it sadly anymore. And I think that this is a fight that was always coming. Let's be frank. You and I have seen it in the Conservative Party. Those tensions. I think Rob Jenrick was correct. I think the church got way too broad in the Conservative Party. I think there was no central religion for a long period of time under various different leaders, and so I think this was a fight that
Although
was.
he did support the various ones,
I
he didn't seem to have a problem with the church. He just moved around what pew he was on.
No, I think that's very unfair, James. Very unfair. But I would
It
say
wasn't a Cameroon.
when he did came in. I think when David Cameron was leader, and as you said, David Cameron, always give him credit for what he did with the budget deficit. It's just a shame they didn't cut spending at the same time. And we saw obviously spending actually increase, which therefore debt meant we went up as well. So there was the deficit was good, but
Yeah.
debt not so good. So I think that ultimately there is and I also know I definitely wouldn't have been allowed in the Tory party under David Cameron to be a member of Parliament. So I think that the truth of the matter is that this is a fight that was always bound to happen at some stage.
Mm.
It's been happening within the Conservative Party for a long period of time. It's now obviously out in the open in Reform versus the Conservative Party. So it's a huge It's a huge moment in centre-right British politics. We'll find out over time. I think we've discussed already. May 7th is going to be a huge test on both.
Mm.
The Conservatives got 15% of the national vote share. Does that go up? To where 19, 20% roughly where they're polling now. Reform UK got 30%. Do they hold that?
When
Do
you say they
Reform,
got, you mean last year? Sorry.
yeah, sorry, in May 2025's local elections.
Yeah.
Reform got 30%. So do Reform hold? Or
But
do
let
they
me
go up?
just stop you. So what you're saying is you know locals way better than me, and you fought in them, won them, run campaigns for them. So what something that's to look out for. It's always interesting to me when people play expectation management in local elections because most of the lobby, as you know, they don't really know about them. They know as much, probably some more than me, but not a load. And so expectation management is quite nebulous, I think. So you're giving us a rough guide of one thing to look out for is their vote share in this locals overall
Up or down?
matching what they're getting polling? And there's a caveat to that, which is the locals aren't happening everywhere. And so with some party, especially now Labour have cancelled a lot. I don't know what the current looks like, but I because my assumption would be that Labour are by chance cancelling them where they're not going to do very well. So Labour are swinging them. So I don't know. Like one thing both of us might want to have a look at is based on where they're running. Where would you expect them? Because I imagine they're now running more heavily in Labour areas where they're doing better. So if Labour match their poll number in these elections, that's not good for them
No,
because
so to
yeah,
back you up
is there
on,
anything I said just wrong or
no, 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 no.
that's my
Look,
understanding?
so there was some polling done by JL Partners on behalf of the Telegraph to look at if there was an election in the areas that have asked for cancellations, what would that rough current polling look like? And it says at the moment, Reform on about 28.3%, Tories on 20.7%, Labour on 17.4%, Lib Dems on
Wow.
16.2%, and Greens on 13.3%. So that's quite close to mirroring what we're seeing a lot on polling averages at the moment or polls
But
overall.
The Tories in Reform are a bit above their standard VI poll. There.
Yes, so the Reformers doing well. Reformer essentially holding based on where we saw those elections last year, and obviously what that would lead to, the Telegraph says, is based on the analysis that it would lead to six Labour councils losing control entirely, and
Wow.
then a further four councils losing its majority, so it would go to what we call no overall control. So they might be largest party, but they wouldn't outright run it. And in Staffordshire, for example, we've got Cannock, Chase, and Tamworth, Labour-led, who have both asked for what they would call are delays. You and I say they're cancellations because that's what they are. But the
Mm.
Conservative-led Newcastle Underline Borough Council has asked for the elections to go ahead. So yes, if what happens happens, and if everyone who requested a cancellation gets it, which by the way, out of 29 councils that have asked for the cancellation, 22 are Labour. That means there'll be a lot more, or at least level pegging, Conservative councils up for election than Labour. Whereas in before, this was meant to be the Labour heavier local election after it was the Tory heavy one in 2025. So we'll get another
Mm.
sense of how are the Tories doing in Redwall and Shire areas. Essex, for example, County Council. That's meant to be huge for Reform UK. Does that
Yeah.
generate the results we expect? In the Redwall that I live in Newcastle under Lyme, again, you would expect Reform to, based on the county election results, probably get a majority from 0 through up to 30
Did you
plus.
say it was Sunderland where Bridget Phillipson is? They're expected to have how many Reform councillors?
So there's some polling suggest they Reform would win every single councillor that's up for election in
Wow.
Sunderland.
That would be. So one thing I want to say is, which I think both me and you agree on, this cancelling is a disgrace.
Yes, it
It's a
is.
complete disgrace. And I don't, I mean, I
The
get why
reasons for it,
people
by the way,
don't.
are nonsense. Because how can you
Yeah.
cancel elections? So local government reorganisations happening in Staffordshire. If you allow Cannock, Chase, and Tamworth, who are both part of the Staffordshire reorganisation, to cancel, but Newcastle and Lyme, who's also part of it, to go ahead, you've contradicted your own message, as you would say, James. In Essex, how can Thurrock, for the second year in a row, cancel their elections, but Essex County Council in the same area have theirs go ahead, and you both claim that it's because of local government reorganisation? It's just, I agree with you. It's totally ridiculous. It's not going to cost Labour the next general election, but if you think delaying it by a year is going to change the minds of many voters, I think people are living in cuckoo land, personally.
Yeah. I think it's disgraceful. And so, but we're now going to have them, but it will give us, it gives us, I suppose, the interesting thing, if you follow politics, is this gives us some hard data. The opinion polls are people like to kick the government. So is Labour's polling a bit below where it really would be an election because people want to tell them, yeah, we think you're doing a bad job, sort it all out. Can Reform maintain it, etc., etc. But last year Reform got what in the locals 30%.
30% national vote share and gained 10
So they were
control
really
of 10 councils.
they were matching their polling numbers. They were able to put money on the table and say, you say this polling isn't really real. We'll look at these election results. And I think me and you have spoken about this loads. My gut feeling is that when we have those elections, despite all the polling and the fact that there's almost new polling every day of the week, definitely every week, that Reform are going to do well, and that maybe they'll do well in Scotland and Wales. When it happens, I think we're going to have another kind of mini meltdown across Westminster, and people are like, "Oh, this is." I mean, because if you're nudging above 30%, and as I said, that my I know not worry, to my annoyance, Labour are gerrymandering the elections, which will flip the result. But it will be interesting if to see if they kind of match their polling with these results, because if it does show momentum, and it will, I think, cause more, more kind of upset in
Well,
Westminster.
James, to your point, there's what was it, 90 plus members of the Welsh Senedd up for election under this brand new voting system, the HON
Yeah,
system used
they've
in the EU.
expanded it, right?
They
They've
expanded
expanded
it
it.
and they've changed the voting system to mirror the EU. So the idea is the percentage of national vote share or the vote share in each region, there's 16 of those, matches pretty seat allocations then based on that. We're looking at potentially some polls suggesting Labour get anywhere between 8 and 12 out of 90 plus members of the Welsh Senedd. If Labour ends up on what they got in the Caerphilly by-election, 10 to 12%, if I remember correctly, like like you say, like you said, polling will show that basically Labour is going to be wiped out in Wales, a place they've had
Mm.
control of for 100 years. In Scotland,
The
if we
wo-
see the SNP retain power, even if it's in a deal with the Greens, but if we see Labour not even as the official opposition, and Reform UK, a place that Nigel Farage would never have thought probably previously he would ever be able to make a breakthrough, that is going to, like you say, I think that is just going to have jaw-dropping effect on the
mm.
Westminster lobby, who I think many are still questioning whether this Farage momentum is real or not. And I think it's going to be nip and tuck, I think, for opposition. But you and I have got friends in the SNP up in Scotland. They seem to think that genuinely, from their own internal polling, Reform actually has a shot at coming second in Scotland. And from friends we've spoken to in Wales, it does look like there's only it's a literal Plaid versus Reform fight.
Yeah, it does. I mean, I think it would be groundbreaking. It would be seismic. I don't. There's a long way to go to the election, but it's undoubted it would be huge. And the interesting, I mean, we've kind of done the Tories and the Reform. So for Keir Starmer, both as you said, both me and you have spoken to people in the Labour Party. The thing that gets me, and I think and maybe I said this on the one we did last week, is whenever I speak to people in Labour, people who have worked for cabinet ministers, I spoke to I spoke to a special advisor in Labour who said to me only a few weeks ago, "Oh, if they don't do well in the locals, I think Keir Starmer will be gone by the end of the year." I'm like, you work for him. And so this is, I think, if people are kind of watching, listening to this, they might think, oh, we've got a kind of a Tory guy here and a Reform guy. Of course, they think this, but we're speaking to Labour people who are saying to us, I don't think Starmer lasts a year. Now, one of the things, I think the key thing they pin that on, tell me what you think. The key thing they pin that on is, does he lose Wales? And if he gets down to single figures in Wales, as you said, a lot of Welsh MPs and a lot of Labour Scottish MPs are going to start looking and going, we're not going to be here. Well, okay, tell me, you've got a unique insight into this. So when you start looking at local election results and polling, as you did, and you start looking at it thinking, I'm not going to hold my seat. What what goes through your mind? What are the impulses? Can you give us an insight into, Labour, Welsh and Scottish MPs wake up after local elections and they're faced, maybe for the first time, some of them, with the realization that I probably only get 3 years left, realistically. I can fight. Or do you even believe that? Do you think no, no, I can make it, I can do this and that? What will go through their heads?
So if you've got elections in your area, you fight to the death. I think because you're out knocking on doors yourself in your own area, you very quickly can start to see the direction of travel. Now, some people might want to ignore it and try and pretend it's not happening. Others, like me, said, well, it's time to just accept what's coming. And what you want to look for is how how big is it? Do Labour put on significant numbers? Is it going to be a landslide to Labour, or is there some sort of can I salvage something from a negative situation? So in Stoke-on-Trent in 2023 at our locals, our actual vote share as a party across the city actually increased. We actually got on net only a net loss of one councillor from the last set of elections in 2019. The problem is Labour swept up all the city independents in the city that
Yes,
got them a
I was
huge
that was the one I
majority.
was there for.
You were there for that one.
Yeah,
So I think that that's, so then you go, okay, fine. But then now the worry is those people who vote independent locally are now going Labour. So then you dressly try
yeah,
and figure out roughly what the figures are. So, I was expecting to lose by 8 to 9,000 minimum, ended up losing by 5, which is a far better result than we
yeah.
anticipated. But if you don't have elections in your local area, you start to look at areas that are similar to yours demographically. So Derby was always one that you could quite closely match with Stoke in terms of demographics
Mm.
of the
But
voter
these
base.
MPs, Labour MPs, they will have a knowledge based on their campaigning history, their knowledge of politics. Oh, no, there's no elections in my area, but that area is like it's the same demographics, and they will go and actively look up those results.
Go look up those results, talk to those MPs, maybe even if they're nearby, pop over and campaign themselves to get a sense check on what it's looking like. And I suppose when you start to see those results, I mean, again, we're talking about Bridget Phillipson, the Education Secretary, who ran for Deputy Leader of the Labour Party, may well wake up and find that every councillor in her constituency for Sunderland City Council is Reform UK. You cannot ignore that. And what you fear the most is, have I got to do an interview anytime soon? Because how on earth do you try and look straight faced at an interviewer, particularly with a camera lens, and go, "Oh no, look, I still think we can win," when they're going to go, "But you're literally just lost every councillor." And the fear is when you lose councillors, those are people who knock on doors for you, deliver leaflets for you, give you a presence, and also get voters in the habit of still voting for you or your party. So then all that, then you start to fear is just a snowball effect that sometimes it just feels it's out of control. And then it comes to
Mm.
the real, then you just basically spend your time sort of throwing, you then galvanize yourself. I did this and had a year. I was like, I'm going to throw everything at it, every local campaign, every envelope opened I was turning up
And
to.
is that because you think you've got a chance? Is that just kind of steel yourself against, like what's the psychology of that?
I think it's in part, you can't, that building is super depressing. And I've been through it in that final year leading up to the general election
You mean
of
Parliament?
Parliament. Sorry, that is indeed the case of walking in there already thinking it's a done deal. It's so depressing. I mean, I know one Labour MP who at the end of 2025 has said to colleagues that I know in Stoke-on-Trent that they're already like they know they've lost already. And I just can't imagine
Mm.
how you're getting up for work every day on the front foot when you already think that you're looking for what's going to come
So,
next.
as an aside, outside of our political views, do you think that is too defeatist? Like, so if I was making a case for Labour, I would say, yeah, they've got problems on the backbenches, but they have an absolutely huge majority. I would say they haven't yet changed the leader. They haven't yet got into the chaos that kind of marked the last 2, 3 years of the Tories, where we went through a couple of leaders. And they've got 3 years. And also, by the way, there will be, not, I don't personally think through their own making, but there'll be some half decent news this year. It's quite likely that largely due to global energy prices, inflation's going to move down to around 2%. And we'll end the year with a couple more interest rate cuts. So people's mortgages are going to start to go down. There'll be less in the news about how bad inflation is. And we'll kind of go into end 26, into 27, and the economy will look kind of okay with still enough time to deliver stuff. So me and you might both, I think we both agree and look at their party and say that they're too divided. They're messing around already with leaders and stuff. But why do you think Labour MPs are being too defeatist by saying, even though we've got 3 years, even though interest rates are looking okay, I give up. I'm done. Or is it hard? Is it too when you're just faced with the result? Are they just being realistic? I mean, what do you think?
So, I mean, to add to that list, James, you've got even potentially net zero immigration, legal immigration, that is. I mean, that could be
Mm.
astonishing.
I mean, I'll believe that when I see it. But yeah,
I agree with you, but what I'm saying is that if some of the stuff that's been talked about happens, or even if you see net migration in the tens of thousands, that would be a huge story. It should be positive. But
yes.
I think that lots of Labour MPs have already talked themselves into wanting to see the back of Keir Starmer, or thinking that Keir Starmer's
Mm.
a busted flush, and it's very hard to talk yourself out of that mentality. And I think that because it is a bubble. You've been in it, I've been in it. It
Yeah.
is intoxicating. The Westminster lobby, let's be perfectly frank, always have their own angles and narratives for their own reasons, right? They were all loving Nigel Farage for the first half of last year. They're certainly loving the bad and not bounce idea as well, and they're writing love pieces there. Let's see what happens
Mm.
after May. Most of them have already said Starmer's basically facing a leadership contest at the end of the year, in their view. I mean, again, you and I like to say, let's see where it all lies comes to the end. But what I find extraordinary is that Labour MPs, as you say, are seemingly wanting to change leader when actually this year they will have things to point to. If interest rates are cut, that's a lot of mortgage holders who are going to be,
Mm.
in a good place. But then inflation, the 2% might be nice, but what does that mean for food inflation? What does that mean for household energy prices? They've got to be able to translate that in the way that voters understand, and hope that those numbers are also. And the problem they've got is food inflation is still very sticky and very high. Energy prices have actually gone up. So even if they come down, they're only coming down to where Labour entered office at the best case scenario. So they're still in that phase, but
Well,
that doesn't give them reason. I think they're too quick to already think that it's done and dusted.
Mm.
And if you look, like you say, at the current week we've just had, if you're a Labour, you should be going, there is a window of opportunity. If the right of British politics is going to be at war with itself, we may
Yeah.
slip through the middle.
Yeah. I mean, and I guess to end on, I think we should talk about this more actually in future episodes. And I think I spoke to you about it today. I'd like to try and write something to get my thoughts together on the money stuff for Labour. I think if you look at all the economic news, disregard the politics, you just look at the economic news, it is quite likely that energy prices are going to be okay, maybe come down. Inflation's is they do believe in the Bank of England, inflation will kind of come round to 2%, which is the target, and hold there, and therefore we'll have two, maybe three rate cuts. I think what there is what I would call the Biden trap, which is the metrics in the United States in the run up to the last presidential election. I don't think they were the same as those, but overall look good. I mean, for one, the US growth rate, the economic growth, is very, very good. And it was decent under Biden. But the problem is, Biden went around telling everyone it's good, and no one felt like it was good. And I think the point you just made is interesting, which is will people and look, number 10 definitely know this because they're talking about what they're pounding in people's pocket. Well, I can't remember the phrase they're using at the moment, but it's much more about the cost of living, what we would call generally the cost of living. And the problem is if they start telling and they're telling people they're turning a corner, if they end the year telling people we've turned the corner and everyone says, because the thing that people forget about inflation, I think in Westminster is it will come down to around 2%, but it hasn't gone down. So everything that's increased is still more expensive than it was 18 months ago. It's not got cheaper. It's just stopped getting more expensive. So if you haven't had a wage increase, you're no richer than you were 18 months ago. In fact, they're still going up a little bit, just not as much as they were before. And so I do wonder if a trap for Labour in the next 18 months is them starting to tell the public things are good and then therefore you just I think like Biden did, you look a bit delusional. And so when
Totally.
for Trump, or in this case, Farage and the Tories probably both say, no, you're crackers, things aren't better. The public go, no, well, I don't know if you can see that happening as well.
No, totally. The Inflation Reduction Act was a contentious thing. Obviously, it was a huge amount of government, basically subsidies and investment that went into the economy. And like you say, the headline figures looked actually very positive. There was a load of jobs created. Companies, or there were jobs created, economic growth, etc., etc. But Donald Trump was very successful at telling everyone, "Look, here's the price of milk. for when Biden entered office to where it is now. Here's the price of meat. Here's what's happening to farmers in your local area. They're being priced out on chemicals, etc., that they need to be able to use, or out of food and feed for their animals, and made it much more just retail and relatable. And I think that is a huge danger for Labour. If you start saying, "Oh, but inflation's at 2%," and people are going, but my weekly food shop used to be £100 for a family of four. Now it's £120. How am I better off? If you say my energy bills have come down, well, maybe they've come down by £100 over the course of a year, but basically you're saving me 10 quid a month. I'm not winning massively out of
Mm.
this. If that 5p cut in fuel duty does go, do the supermarkets suddenly shove on 5p back onto their prices? These are all things to be taken into account. And so I think that, and obviously Labour's now going to potentially give business rates relief just to pubs, but restaurants will say, why not us? Theatres and cinemas will go, why not us? What does that mean for those prices, for the things that we want to go out and enjoy? Do we see more restaurants close on our high streets, more cinemas shut down too, or the price of tickets and food continue to go up there? So, like you said, I'd be very cautious if I were Labour about making sure that what actually people feel day to day is actually going down. Yes, you can say we're turning a corner, but if you end up throwing and making out that you've achieved it and now it's done, I think the voters are not going to thank you, because literally the US is a model for showing where overconfidence in that few
Mm.
metrics that are good for you on the interview with Sophie Ridge on Sky in the morning, but when you go knock on a door in your local community, they're going to go, I don't care about this 2% inflation of the Bank of England. My food is 30p more this week at Tesco than it used to be, etc.
I agree. I think someone can look out of touch. Well, I think we'll do. I think we'll look a bit deeper at that in coming weeks. Maybe dig out some facts and figures. I'm curious to go back and kind of look at the GDP growth as it was at the end of Biden and kind of relate that to how Trump's campaign was doing. But I think we can't be accused of staying away from the issues. We covered the big issues of the week. We've had our we're still friends, are we, Jonathan?
Mate, we'll always be friends no matter what. And what we'll now find out is, are there any more Tory defections this week? We'll find out, like you,
Yeah, I think I'll
at the
check my
end of the
phone
week.
now.
I'll check my phone now. But look, thank you everyone for tuning in as always. Make sure that you follow here Inside Whitehall on our Substack to make sure you get the latest up-to-date gossip from behind the scenes of Westminster, as well as a good discussion on all the big news stories of the week too. And we will see you soon, where I'm sure we'll have more madness to reflect on in the mental place that is Westminster. Cheerio.
Yes, thanks. Bye.